Um, so Andrea Bennett is a senior grant specialist with EPA Region 10. We're also really appreciative that she could make it here today to give us some more details on writing a complete and acceptable and competitive grant application. So Andrea, whenever you're ready, I think we're ready for you to take it away.
Thanks, Matt.
You bet. And Yvonne did give a brief intro at the beginning. If you want to share anything else besides what I just did, feel free. And thanks again.
Okay, thanks, Matt. As you probably saw in my bio, I'm originally from EPA Region 3 in the Mid-Atlantic office, where I mostly did Safe Drinking Water Act programs, such as protecting sources of drinking water, but I also worked in Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, CERCLA, and I did a stint with ATSDR, which is part of CDC. So today I'm going to talk about your budget and administrative management of your grant. I want to explain that this information is applicable to any EPA grant you have, not all of the information, but the majority of the information. These are I handle not just, I used to handle the wetland grants, but I handle almost every single grant that EPA issues. So these are, no matter what program you're involved in, this is the kind of information you need to adhere to. When we review a work plan budget as part of an application or an amendment, this is what is guiding us, 2 CFR 200.403. Is it eligible? And Yvonne addressed this. Is it permitted by the statute and program guidance? Is it reasonable? And that is kind of a judgment call. And I want you to be aware that we're not personally judging it. We as a team will discuss whether something is at times reasonable or not. Okay, so this is never a personal decision. This is kind of a team review. And allocable. Okay, does it really benefit the EPA funded project? So these are the kinds of things you'll be addressing when you put together your work plan. Please be aware that a lot of times your costs will be eligible, but they may not be categorized correctly, and I'll get into that later. If for some reason a cost is disallowed, this is probably one of the reasons why. Okay, the grants unit, we do the administrative review, we look at budgets, we process the grants. The challenges that we face, especially since we just switched to a completely new system for processing grants, which has slowed us down considerably, is that, and some of these things Yvonne mentioned, if the work plan doesn't meet the regulatory requirements, if we're missing forms, if the budgets are incorrect or vague, some purchases require justification, such as equipment or sole source acquisition, some procurement. The program office, as you know, handles all things programmatic, and they will be reviewing the programs and projects. Okay, when you get into grants.gov, something to be aware of, only applications for new funding go into grants.gov, and new funding could also be supplemental. So you may have an existing award of, say, $500,000 for your wetland program, and more funds were made available, and you qualify for those funds, and so your project officer wants to get you that additional $100,000. That is supplemental funding, and that also would have to be applied for through grants.gov. Incremental funds are very different. What that means is that if you came in with an application for $500,000, but at the time only $400,000 was available, but we reviewed and approved your $500,000 application and awarded only $400,000. What that means is down the road, when your project officer hears that, oh, that additional $100,000 is available, at that point in time, you would get incremental funds. And Yvonne just pointed out that's very unusual to happen, but I just wanted you to be aware of the difference. Okay. If you need to have an extension for some reason, and the extension is allowable, most grants cannot exceed 5 years in their project period or budget period. So say it was a 4-year grant, and due to COVID or other issues, you lost some key personnel, you could get what's called a no-cost extension. Or if you decided to revise your budget, it turned out that you actually needed to change your scope of work for some reason because it turned out there was another need you wanted to address and you had a major budget revision, you wouldn't do that through grants.gov. You would just do it with your project officer. And I may need to do an amendment, but you don't involve grants.gov. Okay, once you submit your application into grants.gov, from that point on, all revised documents are emailed to EPA. Okay, so don't say you incorrectly filled out the SF424 or the SF424A and you're correcting it, send it to your PO and grant specialist. Do not enter it into grants.gov. Anything that goes into grants.gov automatically gets assigned a number, and it's very, very difficult to unassign the number. Do not use cents. Grants.gov can't really handle cents, just round up or down. And then if you want to, oh, hold on a second. Okay, that last line shows you more information on policy and guidance that's pertinent to grant applications. Here's an example of the kind of document you will receive. This is an old one. Okay, we no longer use the Las Vegas Finance Center. We use the Research Triangle Park Finance Center, which is in North Carolina. I'll get to that later. But when you get this, you will usually get it from Wendy Wasson. She'll send it to you after your funds are awarded, or if it's a no-cost extension or something, you will get this document. Please look at it, because this document has everything in it, and it has your name, it has your project officer, it has your grant specialist, it has your budget period, your project period, and then as you go down, it will have terms and conditions, which I'll talk about later. It has the administrative terms and conditions, the programmatic, it has all the contact information. Please save this in a spot where you can pull it up and check it, because sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes there's a mistake and you'll say, actually, our project period does not end December 31st. It actually ends January, whatever, 31st, whatever it is. It might be it's unlikely, but it is possible that there are incorrect aspects to the document. So please look at it when you get it. Okay, these are the forms for applications, which Linda briefly alluded to. The SF424 is information on who, what, where, when, and how. It just kind of summarizes it briefly, and I think it's 3 pages. Well, I'll get into how this could potentially be revised. The SF424A is just basically a budget worksheet. That's really what it is. The 4704, you do need this. It's pre-award compliance, so it's to make sure civil rights are being addressed. The 5754, we do appreciate this being updated. We use this to make sure we have the correct contact information. The 6606, it's there at grants.gov, but my understanding is the way grants.gov now presents it is that, you know, I'm not sure how they present it, but we often don't receive it. And the reality is if you're getting more than 100,000, you must fill this form out. And the next one is disclosure of lobbying activities. We rarely see that. That's if you're actually doing lobbying. The SF424B, you don't need it anymore. This link is an old link on how to apply for grants. It's not completely up to date, but they have not updated it yet. So I'm just giving that to you in case that would be helpful. Okay, here's a checklist. This is also from 2017. You might want to look at it, but again, it hasn't been updated. So that's something. Now, post-award, I'm going to mention this because this is kind of part of the deal when you get funds. The SF 424 is your federal financial report. It now is required to be submitted annually. 5 years ago, you only sent it at the end of the grant, project period, budget period. It goes to, as I said, Research Triangle Park Finance Center. That's who it goes to. And here's when it's supposed to be sent in: annually, 30 days at the end of the reporting period, 90 days for annual reports, but the final reports are due 120 days after the end date. The MeeBee-Weebii. I handle the MeeBee-Weebii. If you have any questions about that, contact me. It's basically when there's greater than $250,000 in procurement, and I'll talk about that later. And it is also due annually. And then again, the final report is due 120 days after the end of the grant period. Pen and ink revisions. Here's our policy on streamlining grants for states and tribes. Sometimes it's burdensome to go in and do everything back in the form, and that's fine. So generally, you can always pen and ink. You can just pen and ink whatever the changes are. The only time that wouldn't be allowable is if you applied in the grants.gov for $400,000 and you're now actually going to be getting $500,000, we're going to need an actual new signed SF 424. And then regardless of whether it's lower or higher, we always need a revised SF 424A. And the SF 424A, the budget worksheet, needs to match the budget, which needs to match the work plan. Post-award, once the funds have been awarded, if there are any kind of changes, check in with your PO or your grant specialist. Okay, depending on what the changes are, you may not need to do anything, but sometimes we need to do a formal EPA amendment, and I'll get into when that happens. Developing the budget, and Yvonne and Linda touched on this. Here's what used to be called your CFDA. That's the listing of all the grants that are available through EPA. It's now called the assistance listing. And this is a link. You can just click on that and it'll take you right to that. And that, you should look at that. That is what Congress put together and what they expect this program to achieve. They'll tell you exactly why they put it together and what they're going to achieve. As you know, it's competitive and requires the 25% match. The other thing is that we expect the budgets to comply with your own policies and procedures. If you have specific way travel is handled, in addition to the information we'll need in the budget, we expect that you're going to make sure that the budget is meeting your own policies and procedures, because everybody does things a little differently. Manage, monitor, and document payments and expenditures. However you want to document things, please do it. Please have a file, or if you want to print stuff out, print it out. Please keep these in a safe place. Headquarters conducts random auditing of grants. We never know, in addition to when there are actual issues, there are random audits are conducted, and when they randomly audit, they're going to request this kind of information, and if it's not available, it's going to be a red flag. So it's just like your own personal accounting system. You need to document everything, so it's just the same thing. As I said before, the budget reflects the scope of work in the work plan and must match the SF 424A object class categories. And here's an example of an object class category issue. Okay, conference space rentals and printer paper are, reasonable, allocable, and eligible expenditures. They're totally okay, but they're not object class categories. So printer paper needs to be placed in the correct object class category, which be supplies. The conference space rental needs to be placed in its correct category, and that would be other. And I'll get into those. Here are the different categories. As you can see, they match SF 24A. Please try to construct your budget in a way that it matches it, because if it doesn't match it, and the grant specialist can't understand, what's going on in the budget, they're just going to send it back and say, hey, you got to rework the budget. So from the get-go, I recommend, even if you do it differently, we're not saying don't have your own way to account for funds. I see massive budgets, multi-million-dollar budgets where they organize things by tasks. That's fine. But when we review the budget, by law, we need to look at it in these object class categories. So please have a budget attached to your grant that meets these categories. Personnel, these are the direct costs for salaries of direct employees. If you have a program where you want to send an intern to a conference, or maybe give them a stipend or something, and they're not an employee, that's called participant support cost, and it goes into other. And I'll talk about that later. Costs for employees of subrecipients, subawardees, that's all in the subaward. If you guys have subawards, I don't know that you do, but if you have subawards, that's all in other. We don't actually want to see that because they're not a direct employee. Fringe, explain what the fringe is. Whatever it is, it's cost of leave, employee insurance, pensions, whatever it is, we need to see it. If we don't see it, the grant specialist will have to go back and ask for it. And again, it should reflect your own policies. Okay, again, the travel is for the employees of the grant only. If you have a tribal member who you want them to attend this conference because it's important, they need to be participating, but they're not an employee of the grant, direct employee of the grant, we can pay for their travel, but that goes into other under participant support cost. Here's our links to per diems. Here's our links to mileage. Here's where you can get an idea of, what would be reasonable. And here are some of the things that would be covered under travel. Supplies. Supplies, this is covered in the CFR. The CFR addresses the difference between a supply and a piece of equipment. So anything that's less than $5,000 per item is considered a supply. And you can't just say we're buying supplies. You have to say we're buying supplies, and here are is what it is. Maybe it's a laptop and it's tied to this task. Maybe it's a some kinds of software that you're purchasing. And again, this gets kind of tricky. If you're just purchasing software outright, right, it's kind of a supply. But if you're getting online support on a monthly basis, that would probably go under other. Okay, so leasing and renting, services, they're categorized as other. Equipment, you need to look around for equipment. If you're in a location and you need a specific device for water quality sampling, and really you can only use this one, that's fine. We are concerned, but we're not going to not provide equipment just because we think it's too expensive. We need to just see justification. You have to say, here's why we need it. We looked around, this is it, and this is why we're getting it. So equipment needs prior approval and address it in the narrative. And if you can only buy one, explain why. Sometimes, you'll just say, hey, I went to these websites, this is what's around, this is what they cost, this is the one that meets our needs best. Contracts are services, and they're established by a procurement contract, and it's with a firm company. A contractor may call themselves a consultant, but we may not define it that way. We are very specific in our definition. We define a consultant as an individual, so that's one person providing expert service, and that person is managed directly by you, the grantee. An example would be say you hired a videographer for a conference. You want to videotape the conference. Okay, if you're going to stand there and manage how they videotape it and tell them, okay, I want you to do a close-up. No, I don't want you to cover this portion. Wait a minute, I need a wide shot of the entire room at this point. You're managing this person. It's an individual. They're providing the expert service. That's a consultant. But if you just hire this videographer and say, videotape the conference, and then I want the tape at the end, that's a contractor. If you hire a consultant, you have to meet well, I'll get into that in the next slide. But I just want to say that there's a difference between contracts and services that are under other. For example, water quality sampling. If you set up a contract from the get-go or any kind of service from the get-go with this entity, and they're just going to provide it for 12 months, every month they provide the service, that's probably a contract. But if it's an occasional thing like, oh, wow, we need to get this, sampling done or analyzed, and we're just going to use, this company ABC, that probably would go into other because it's occasional. And same thing with like copying, that kind of thing. Okay, consultant. If you do hire a consultant, there's a consultant cap, and you can calculate it by going to this link. It's ballpark, I think like $84 an hour or something like that. If the consultant exceeds that, then we will pay up to the consultant cap, and then you would have to pay the difference. Sometimes it's worth it to get the consultant because an expert consultant can get the work done maybe a lot faster than a contractor. So in the long run, you might save money. It's up to you. But that's the stipulation if you actually hire a consultant. It cannot exceed the consultant cap. But again, you can pay the difference. Here's that catch-all other. It's everything from like internet services and rental lease of equipment, participant support costs, which I talked about, subawards. I don't know if you subawards. I'll get into either any of these, but if it doesn't look like what you're going to spend the money on fits easily into any of the other categories, it might fit into other. Again, just check with a grant specialist if you're not sure, because we do, even in enormous budgets that we get from entities that are getting massive amounts of money. Okay, they'll put them in the wrong category, and we can't accept that budget. We have to send it back, and they have to revise it. And I talked about participant support costs. This is something the PO has to approve. If you're getting indirect cost and you're using a modified total direct cost rate, you would exclude the participant support costs from that rate, but you may not be getting that kind of indirect cost. Again, it's stipends, training fees, or travel for non-employees. Participant support costs can also be rebates. So if you were providing some sort of device to the community at a reduced rate, you were shouldering the entire cost, but so they only had to pay a portion of it, that might be put under participant support costs. And if you have any questions about that, just check in with us. It doesn't look like your program would have it. It applies more to like the diesel program when you're trying to provide diesel buses or wood stoves. I don't think. Well, anyway, just check with us if it would apply to travel for non-employees.
Actually, it applies like to our TWIG grant. We are able to use some of the funds that we provide to the host, in this case, Snoqualmie, and so some of those can be used for support travel of the other participants.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
would be, that would be participant support costs. They're not employees of the grant, but you want them to attend the conference. That's fine. Just place it correctly.
Yeah, that is typical. It gets placed in other.
Okay. And what about subawards? Are there any subawards in these grants or no?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right. Subawards, that you're probably familiar with this. They're placed in other. If they're more than $25,000, they have to be reported in FSRS. This is important. The subawards must meet all the federal laws and policy that you must meet, but we're not going to check unless it gets audited. So when you give that subaward, we expect that you as the direct recipient are going to make sure that they are correctly categorizing expenditures, that they are reporting correctly, that they are, like things like consultants, everything. But we're not going to look at it. We will not look at your subawardee unless your grant gets flagged, and the auditor will look at the subaward, and they will, they'll look and see if they're meeting all the federal laws and policies that you're meeting. Here's the guidance on it. There's the link. It's not too old, so I recommend checking that out if you want more detail. In some ways, subawards are looked at even more closely than the actual recipient grant. That's in the CFR. They say up front, if you're going to use a subaward, and a lot of, and you do, because how else, can you get your work done? Just make sure that your subawardee is aware of the federal laws and policy. Okay, the match. You have a match. The match costs, again, have to meet the same policy, laws, and regulation and guidance that you are meeting. They must be necessary, reasonable, allowable, and allocable. Whatever your match costs are, you have to show them in your budget, in your SF 424 and in your SF 424A. Okay, so there's a place for them in each of these forms. There's a place to show your match. Make sure you show them, when you show them in the SF 424A, put them where they are. If the match is all in personnel, put it in personnel. If it's all in other, put it in other. We need to know. We need to know where it is. You can use volunteer services if it's part of an approved project and categorized correctly. Facilities, equipment use, etc. can be part of match, but not if you're double dipping, not if you're charging it to another EPA grant. Okay, because a lot of times you probably are doing that. You're probably juggling the wetlands grant, but maybe you're also doing the Clean Water Act 319 non-point source pollution grant, and maybe there's some similar activities going on because it's all about water quality. Just make sure it's not being charged to another EPA or federal agency grant agreement. And again, clearly show it in your budget and the SF 424A, and it's going to be in the SF 424 because it's not funds that we're providing you. Congress considers match to be part of the larger budget. Congress wants to review it. So when we send grants off for that approval by it's a congressional review, they want to see the match. That's why we're asking for this. They consider part of it, and they also consider if the match is going to be $20,000, then it's $20,000. You can't later say, oh, actually it's not going to work out. You're just going to have to maybe juggle things so you can continue to provide that $20,000. Okay, PPGs, performance partnership grants. Not everybody wants to do it. There are good things about it. There are bad things about it. It's entirely up to you, the grantee. If you do want to pursue it, the wetland program is eligible to be in a PPG. I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but the reason you might want to do it is because when you do a PPG, it reduces your minimum match. And I don't think you have to worry about a maintenance of effort, so I'm going to skip that part. Here's the guidance for PPG for tribes. So if you're thinking about it, or if you have any questions about your existing PPG, if you're thinking about putting the wetlands program into an existing one, this is the document. This is the document for tribes. Okay. And it's the sum of the non-federal cost share required under each of the environmental program grants. But for tribes, that gets reduced. So here's how it works. Okay. So even though, oh, okay. Yeah, all right, I'll have to send that later. I'll do that later. Put the link in the chat box. Okay, so in the first 2 years of a PPG, the cost share will be 5% for any program with a match requirement. So the wetlands program has a 25% cost share match, but in the first 2 years, it will be 5%. Then after 2 years, it'll increase to 10%, okay? If we determine you're able to provide that. If you have economic hardship, or you're in a situation which in this point in time, it's not really a good idea to provide the full match, you may request a full waiver. And you can request a full waiver or a reduced waiver at any point in time. That is perfectly okay. If you want to do a match waiver, because you decided to get a PPG, you put together a letter. It's addressed to Peggy Johnson, who's the grants management officer. I guess, oh, I should have provided well, you just say it's to Peggy Johnson. She's the GMO. And this is the kind of information you would be provided. Estimated median household income, unemployment rate, socioeconomic data. You actually send the letter to your PO, but Felicia Thomas is the one who will handle it. So it has to, either the PO can forward it to her or you can send it to her. Okay, when you get a match waiver approved, okay, so, oh yeah, that's right. That waiver applies to all the programs in the PPG for 2 years. So if it's approved for wetlands, it's also approved for 319. It's also approved. I mean, you could, potentially have an air grant in there, or a Clean Water Act 105, 106 monitoring, 105 Clean Air Act. These all could be addressed by that letter. And then after 2 years, we kind of do a reevaluation. You have to submit a letter. It can have the same information basically in it. You're just kind of saying, hey, we're in the same situation. And then it will hold for the rest of the project budget period. Okay, so here's a summary of the match waiver requirements. If you end up pursuing that, it's up to you. We see it both ways. I personally haven't seen a lot of wetland program grants in the PPG. Generally, it seems to be Clean Water Act 106, Clean Water Act 319, and then the GAP, the IGAP program. But it is available for you if you'd like it. Okay, indirect cost rate. If you want to use indirect cost, you must have an approved current indirect cost rate agreement in order to draw down the indirect cost. It used to be historically that if you had a rate in the past, you can no longer use the 10% de minimis rate. That has changed. So you can now use the 10% de minimis rate. However, I don't know that that language has been updated in the policy yet, even though that's what's going to be happening. The 10% de minimis rate is pretty low. So most entities, if they want an indirect cost rate agreement, they want something that's, a little bit higher. Oh, okay, I'm going to go back to the PPGs. So there was a question. I'd rather just, I guess, what was the question about the PPGs? Let's see the, Linda, can you tell me what the question was? Or Yvonne?
So Allison Warner's question, you mean?
Yeah.
The post that I was making. So Allison Warner's saying, I'm confused by what you just said, mixing PPG and wetland program development grant. Does PPG match count toward wetland program development grant 25%, but it has its own 5% and 10% requirements? So I think she just needs a little clarification.
It would be in
Yeah.
lieu.
Okay,
If
this is the way it would work, is that if you don't have a PPG, your wetland grant must provide a 25% match. This is only if your wetland grant is in your PPG. So if your tribe has a PPG and that wetland grant is in the PPG, then the match is reduced. That's only if it's in the PPG. I'm only talking about it if it's in the PPG. If it's not in the PPG, the 25% is required. Okay?
It's a statutory requirement.
Yes.
And for Allison, she's with the Tulalip Indian tribe and she works with John Hall. I'll just give a brief example, Allison. Many of your wetland program development grants have gone through prior Tulalip tribes PPGs, and they would have been subject to whatever the reduced match was then. But recently, in the last year, because there was a timing disconnect, the most recent award that the Tulalip tribe received was a standalone wetland program development grant, so its match requirement was 25%.
That's the exact terminology we use. If a grantee has a PPG, but there's another element that's not in the PPG, we call it a standalone. And to be honest, sometimes you can have both. I've actually seen that. You could have,
Yep.
you could have like your competitive 319 is standalone and you've got to have that 40% match. And then you might have some 319 in the PPG. And so that match is no longer 40%. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
All right, back to indirect cost. Where you get your indirect cost, and I didn't go into this, but if you go to the link, it has it. You can get it from the Department of Interior. Is typically, most of grantees tend to use the Department of Interior, and they have a whole website about how to get your rate, how to renew your rate. You can also get it through EPA. If it isn't approved for the current fiscal year that you're in, you may have to send funds back to EPA. And if the rate changes, if the rate goes up, I mean, if you have so you have a 33% rate the first year, and then the second year of a 35% rate, obviously your use of indirect can increase. But if it goes down, and sometimes it does, you cannot continue to draw down at with the 35% rate. What you can do is use the final FFR to reconcile your indirect costs. Okay, so just make sure when you're closing out the grant, look at the rates, look at what was drawn down, and sort it out. Okay, keep track of things and sort it out, because this is something that does get reviewed by us during closeout. Okay, MeeBee-Weebii. If you have greater than 250,000 in procurement, you have to report. In the past, there were requirements about submitting fair share goals and objectives, and that has been temporarily suspended. Okay, and we no longer provide the MeeBee-Weebii certification. And I know, I came from Region 3, and Region 3 has all of these big cities like Philadelphia and Richmond and Baltimore, and there were tons of MeeBee-Weebii certified entities, and so there was a presence of MeeBee-Weebii certified entities. I have found in the Pacific Northwest not so much, so I understand that. However, you are required to make a good faith effort to use MeeBee-Weebii firms if they are available to you. And if you have greater than 250,000 of procurement, which is defined as supplies, equipment, contractual, and other, not personnel, fringe, travel, or indirect, then you must report annually. The report must follow the federal fiscal year, which starts October 1st and ends September 30th. And if you have any questions about it, contact me. I'm the MeeBee-Weebii person. It's a great program. It makes a difference in community. Small businesses and women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses can get a foothold in the community, and they can get business. So it's a really good program. But I get that you don't always see MeeBee-Weebii firms, but I do think it's a great program, and I'm glad we support it. Okay, other issues. I heard international travel was mentioned. Some things that you put in your grant, they are eligible, they are reasonable, they are approvable. However, they may require prior award, like international travel. If you're going to be traveling internationally, we actually do not sign off on it. That international travel, say you're going to Canada for a meeting, we have to send that travel to headquarters and they have to sign off on it. Now, if there's some sort of international wetlands conference and everybody in the Pacific Northwest, all tribes and states are going to be going to it, sometimes we'll put together kind of a bulk request to headquarters saying, hey, everybody in the wetlands program is going to this workshop, but we need to know ahead of time. Food, that's another issue. You can buy it, but you just have to get approval, and your PO has to fill out a special form. Food is a big red flag in audits and reviews. So I mean, and I get it. It's great when you're having a workshop to serve food. I mean, it's fine. We know you're not serving a meal. It's just light refreshments. You just kind of have to address it. When you get your award document, after all the information about your budget, a second or third page will have your terms and conditions. The first section will have the administrative terms and conditions. And that first section will have a link. That link has almost everything I've talked about today. It addresses everything. It addresses indirect costs. It addresses light refreshments. It addresses international travel, everything. Just go to that link. It's in the, from whenever you receive an EPA award or amendment, and there are administrative terms and conditions, that first link, which changes, it changes almost every year, so we update it, has all of the information right there. That is the link, and you have it, because if you've ever gotten funds from EPA, you have that link. As I said, you may have an older link, but you have it, and it addresses all this stuff. Pre-award. Okay, pre-award, say you've decided you want a budget that starts January 1st. And so, but for whatever reason, there were issues with your grant, you needed to change some things, some key personnel left. Say the funds were not awarded until February 1st. Pre-award allows you to start to use those funds January 1st. It does not allow you to use those funds December 1st, before you can start when you've stipulated your grant period started, your project period and budget period started January 1st. Even though we didn't award the funds till February 1st, that's what pre-award is. Okay, so it's reimbursement for costs incurred from the project and budget period start dates if such costs would have been allowable if incurred after the award. But the only caveat is that, you're taking a little bit of a risk because there's always a chance, maybe funds wouldn't get awarded, and we can't 100% promise. But that's pre-award, and sometimes, grantees do need to use that. Okay, this is my last page, and well, not my second to the last page. I recommend visiting this link. This link has information for each object class category. It is extremely detailed. The appendix has sample budgets. It has information on personnel, fringe, travel, supplies, equipment, contractual, other, indirect. I didn't really get into program income. If you have questions about program income, it's in there, but also program income. Do you guys ever get program income? That's what that is funds that are generated. You do?
No.
No. Oh no. All right. So forget that. Okay. RAIN. This is where all EPA policy for all grantees is located. Any EPA policy that is issued is under that link. Okay, general administrative terms and conditions. Here's where you can find the current ones and the older ones. That it's a website that has the for administrative terms and conditions, not programmatic. And then here's the assistance listings. Remember we talked about this earlier, and I had the link to yours. So I recommend going to that just to see what Congress is expecting of you, because it may help you in developing your grant. Hopefully that's what your grant is addressing. And then that's the end. Any questions? If you have any questions, I think in Yvonne's PowerPoint, she listed the grant specialists for the wetland programs. That they are
Yep.
Felicia Thomas and Anne Mannion. And then if you have any questions about Meeby Weeby, or just for whatever reason, contact me. All grant specialists will get back to you regardless of, whether or not we have the grant. We will make sure somebody gets back to you. And will you be sharing this PowerPoint, or should I just separate out the links and put them in the chat?
You're muted, Matt.
Oh, Matt, you're on
Matt,
mute.
you're mute.
You're still muted. How weird. That's so strange.
Well,
Well,
he has Matt, check your
There you
like
go.
if there you go. It's
Matt.
unmuted now. No, we're still not hearing him. Interesting.
maybe I have to stop sharing my screen.
Try that.
Okay, I will stop sharing. And I'm going to put those links in the chat for everybody.
That'd be great, Andrea. I think that the slideshows will be shared as well, but
They will, yes.
It doesn't hurt to provide them up front.
Definitely. Thanks, everybody. And I just want to say thanks for doing the wetland stuff. I think wetlands are incredibly important. And I just from my years in non-point source pollution and source water protection, I know they really help with drinking water and protection as well as stormwater management.
And I'm going to address one more thing because some of you may be wondering, okay, so when is, like in particular, any of the regional requests for applications coming out? Right now we have a slight delay, one because there is a transition in administrations, and so it's not uncommon sometimes that before, like I said, new leadership wants to look at things. But right in particular, we're having to address an issue that has come up, in particular as it relates to the wetland program development grants, is that we tend to do 2-year awards. So we sort of commit monies from 2 years. And a particular, I think, appropriations subcommittee is asked for a briefing from EPA about our practice in doing that. So until that briefing happens, we are been told to pause going out with any of our requests for applications for the competitive grants.
And then just as many of you know, this is Linda Storm with Region 10 and on the National Tribal Set-Aside. That RFA went out, and I anticipate that the panels will be convened for reviewing whatever all the applications were that were submitted by the January 15th deadline. And that is managed by our headquarters contact, Myra Price, with representatives from across the EPA regions in the nation to review the applications from the tribes received. So our hope would be that what Yvonne was speaking to, hopefully it won't interfere with that particular award. My hope is it won't, because that was delayed for almost a year to get that out the door. And so the goal would be, as far as I know right now, Yvonne, if you know anything different, that, you know,
yeah, as far as I know, it's yeah, that the pause is only in for going out with any new requests for applications.
Okay, so in that case, then probably what would typically occur, and again, region by region, they might have slightly different schedules. But for Region 10, any successful tribal awardees for the National Tribal Set-Aside, if they were desiring for those to be part of a PPG, thereby having whatever their reduced match is, we would work to process those. I'm the key contact and work with our Tribal Trust and Assistance Unit, project officers, as well as the grant specialist here that Andrea mentioned, to get those awarded through your PPGs by sometime, you know, the end of this fiscal year, which would be September 2021. That would be the general goal. So hoping that will happen and that there'll be some successful applicants for awards in our region as well as others.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Matt.
Good. The audio switched on me when my headset died. So I just wanted to make sure we got to all the questions that were in the chat. Some of them got kind of bumped up pretty way up there. I wanted to make sure we got Allison Warner's question answered about applying early. And she had asked if you apply early and find out that your application was incomplete or you wanted to refine something. She wondered if you can still email and have that application considered.
That email consideration only happens if we're looking at like some refinement as part of an incremental award. If it's an initial award or a supplemental, you still have to go through grants.gov. And remember, with grants.gov, if you have to make a correction, you have to do a resubmission.
Got it.
And just, I mean, I'm not quite sure what she's thinking. This is Linda. Usually, if an application is submitted by the deadline, that's it. I mean, that's the material that is available for the review panels to evaluate in terms of the criteria. That said, so that is what gets looked at for the competitive award against those criteria that Yvonne went over. That said, if the proposal is one of those that receives the higher, whatever the breakoff is for awardees and can be awarded, then there's an opportunity, and typically this does happen with the tribal work plans, to address any questions that the reviewers may have had, to work to complete a final work plan for the awards, for clarity and communication as to what the goals and objectives are. So that's the opportunity where when
For refinement.
awarded, refinements can be made to clarify the goals and objectives and intentions and the outputs and outcomes in collaboration with the EPA contact, either project officer or technical monitor. In the case of those applications that go through the PPG process, our program staff provide technical assistance to work through the revised work plans in concert with our project officers in the tribal.
But in response to requests for application, those submissions have to come from grants.gov. So if you didn't find out, in time, that it was either incomplete or there was something you forgot, like I said, if you didn't make the effort to try to modify it or correct it through grants.gov, through a resubmission, then it just can't be considered in our review.
But I'm guessing, though, I mean, if on the rare occasion that you submit it early, and maybe this, Allison, is what you're talking about, you submit it early, there's still some lead time, and then you go, oops, I presume you could resubmit a new one. I'm not exactly sure how that gets communicated and the old one gets removed.
No, it gets replaced. It just gets replaced, right?
Yep. Okay. Then that's pretty easy to do.
So you're not suggesting resubmitting it into grants.gov once it's been submitted. You wouldn't
Once the deadline, once the deadline is expired, no, you could not resubmit anything into grants.gov at all. That's been a mistake that folks have made previously when we've worked with them to ask for revised work plans. You don't want to do that. I think the instance Allison may have been considering is if they submit it early before the deadline into grants.gov. Here's the question, Andrea. Would it behoove them to resubmit their final to grants.gov to replace the earlier one? They could do it that way, could they not?
No, well, once it's been submitted into grants.gov, as I said, it's assigned a number and it's processed, and now it's got a place in the system as a new grant. And so once you've submitted something into grants.gov, that's it. Then from that, you can change it. You can absolutely change it, but send everything outside of grants.gov to the PO or the grant specialist.
Okay, I think there may be a bit of an ethics issue around doing that, though, prior to a grant expiration date for competitive grant. I'm not clear about that.
Well, I think doesn't the competitive grants, do we even process it here, or because I know some of the competitive programs, it actually gets routed through headquarters we
process it all in the region.
We process, so we have two.
Okay.
Yeah, we have two RFAs. One is let at the national level and managed and reviewed by them, but the monies come to our region ultimately, and we process those. And then the other is the regional managed RFA that's all at the regional level, and those monies get processed.
Yeah, so we review those, determine their eligibility, and then also do the reviews. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So for the tribes, they're seeing a totally different process on the outside in terms of who's announcing the award and who the key contacts are for those two. But in practice, when and if an award is made, it's all the same because it's all handled at the Region 10 level, regardless of whether the application was submitted to a national tribal set aside request for proposals and applications or the Region 10, if that makes sense.
But that's why I try to emphasize in my presentation that before you hit the submit button, to do due diligence to make sure you don't have to go back into grants.gov. It's a can be a bit of a nightmare and slippery slope. As far as it being incomplete, like I said, if it's the good thing about grants.gov is, again, at least structurally, it's designed to make sure that you have all the necessary paperwork, else it will not process the submission. But as I said, if you're something you want to refine, think about if it's worth the extra effort to go back in there to fix something.
And the other thing is as I said, we switched to a new system, so everything is taking a little bit longer now. So it is prudent to get it in earlier rather than later.
There was a question from Andrea Godoy earlier. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name. I want to make sure it got answered. She had asked, is it possible to obtain a copy of an awarded grant application? And I think Yvonne may have answered that. She had mentioned the website of all.
Yeah, the website. I wouldn't say it's the application, but it would be a work plan, because every application is, it's a little different. Because what required for an application like 3 years ago is a little different than what we require now, but some things have not changed, such as sort of the content of a work plan or a budget narrative. And then I know Jackie had a question with regard about this 15-day window. So, so for feedback, so we do consider a 15-day window to notify the applicants. Particularly we do the notification first on the applicants that are that we've made a decision to not receive an award, and within that 15 days, but we do not adhere to a 15-day as far as us being able to schedule with them, the feedback meeting. We'll do, whatever it takes and however long it takes, for us to find a time that works for them to sit down and provide that feedback.
Kelsey had a good question, kind of more open-ended for our project officers and grant specialists here. If you're interested in applying to continue supporting a program or a work group, what do you recommend to keep applications fresh and desirable for funding?
And I understand it, because she's asking specifically about how do we continue to support things like the TWIG, through a competitive grant. Well, the reality is that you try to be very specific that, again, what, the areas that you're focusing on, the outreach, those change every year for you guys.
I would just add to what Yvonne is saying is that there is this tension, I totally know, between the way the competitive grants are set up as being project oriented, deliverable specific, versus program implementation or program management. And clearly, we're wanting y'all to develop wetland program plans and be able to be successful at those plans continuing. So the trick is for each new application to refresh it, to make it new. And as Yvonne was saying, get as specific as you can on what the new either pilot project or specific workshop subject matter will be, that's new and nothing that you've done before. So it can be the same framework. So for example, for the TWIG, where your grant has funded the existence of a lead tribe to work with a consortium of Region 10 tribes to host biannual meetings and then a training periodically. Get real specific about that. And if there are any additional action activities that you'll be doing that are unique to the next 2-year period, put those in your tasks and timeline. So similarly, for a new grant, say from a tribe that's received funding over the years and has a program, they're continuing work that may be already in a wetland program plan that they have, but they need to discern and be real clear on how the work that they're doing on monitoring assessment is new and different and adding value to what they've already done. As an example, it can include, so for the core element framework, monitoring assessment, voluntary restoration protection, regulatory program development, and water quality standards. One of those elements, if it wasn't emphasized previously, could be the bulk of the next application in specific if it hadn't been addressed. So those are some thoughts and ideas. And then for new applicants that haven't ever received a wetland program development grant, you'll see when reading the RFA that we emphasize the importance of supporting tribes to develop wetland program plans. So that's a really good place to start in developing a wetland program plan. We become familiar with what we call the core element framework. Look at other tribes' wetland program plans on our national website, get a sense of what those are, choose how you want to approach it. You can use the core element framework and choose 2 or 4 of those, and you can even add more. And also be aware that for tribal communities and cultures, we're very supportive of the integration and addressing of traditional ecological knowledge and practice and culture within those. So there are examples out there where that's been done as well.
I was just checking out the wetland grant database. It was working. Lots of information there. It said 1,500 some returns. Are there any other outstanding questions? Either Jimmy, if you recorded any that we haven't gotten to, or any other of our participants, feel free to either type into the chat or speak up.
It looks like I've got one from the beginning of the meeting, Carrie. She asked, who would you contact to see your scores if you weren't selected, or to see where you would need to improve for a next round of applications?
Yeah, I think that there's we put a bunch of contact info, especially for Region 10, in the chat through.
Right. Well, so in every RF request for application, again, there is a designated contact, and that person is also the one who runs the panels. Again, we don't share the actual scores. So what we'll do is in the feedback, instead you schedule a feedback, we would go over, some suggestions of how to make the proposal better.
Great. I think that's the end of our training. Thanks so much to our presenters, Yvonne and Andrea and Linda. I really appreciate it. And of course, all our participants and your great questions. If you have any follow-up questions, I put my email in the chat. It's mattb, M-A-T-T-B, at snoqualmietribe.us. I'm happy to follow up with you. Like I mentioned, my intent is to post this recording on the web. I'll have a link that I'll put on the Twitch website, or you can just email me directly. Yeah, I thought this went really well, and so thanks to everybody for being model web citizens.
Thanks, Matt.
Oh, go ahead. This is just one more thought for y'all. Please feel free to reach out to either Yvonne or myself, on any follow-up questions or needs you have in Region 10. And then we also have our colleagues and contacts for your EPA regions that we can guide you to if you don't know who those are. So take care.
All right, and with that, everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.